Thank you, Pex, and thank you everybody for joining us today. Very excited to have everyone, and we want to spend the next hour talking a little bit about what product management is, how you potentially break into the field, and maybe going into some of the interview questions that you might commonly see. So let me start off by sharing a little bit about my background. I did my undergrad and my graduate degrees both at Stanford and ended up in product management a couple of years after I graduated. I say my first real product management job was running product management for the Words with Friends studio and all of the other With Friends games for a handful of years, and was a director of product at a company called Zynga. After Zynga, I moved to Dropbox and ran their business product for a couple of years on the product management side. Moved from Dropbox to Gusto, and then from Gusto to Pilot, where I'm now the VP of product management, running the product management team and the product design team. So I spent a little bit over 11 years in product management leadership at a handful of different Silicon Valley startups, and I'm very excited to share some of the things that I have learned with you today. We will skip JC's biography, but JC has also spent most of her career in product management in Silicon Valley, working at companies like Dropbox, Airbnb, WeWork, and is now the VP of product at a startup called Webflow. So we wanted to start out today with a brief overview of what is PM. And the reason we find this pretty helpful is one of the most common questions that we get from people either looking to break into the field or people who have worked with product managers is, I don't really totally understand what this role is. It seems that it's a little bit different with everybody I ask. Can you give me a very brief overview of what it actually means to be a product manager? And I think there's a really interesting insight in that conversation. The PM job is definitely different at every company. It's different at every company that we've ever worked at. It's different between hardware and software companies. It's different in Silicon Valley, non-Silicon Valley. But there's a lot of variance in this role in a way that you would not normally see for a traditional job title. But after spending some time in the field, one of the things that we've concluded is there are definitely some principles that stay the same across all the different product management jobs. So we want to start off today by telling you a little bit about what we think those principles are and the commonalities between the roles, and then move on into some other topics. So let's start off first with the core principles that we've seen be really consistent across product management. Some of you may be familiar with this slide. It's a fairly common picture for representing how we think about product management. And what it tries to capture is product managers really sit at the intersection of a handful of different fields. On the one hand, you are often the person representing the business interest, whether it's on a feature basis or a team basis. A big part of your responsibility is to say, how is what we're doing make sense for the business? You also represent the technology side of things. We'll sort of get into requirements for product managers and technical backgrounds in a minute, but one of the other pieces you have to do as a product manager consistently is say, we represent the voice of technology. We're trying to build something new. We're trying to build something that has never been done before. Is this possible? Is it feasible? Is it viable? And on the last side, one of the other really core characteristics of a product manager is you're responsible for UX, and UX in the broadest sense of the word. It's actually thinking from a customer perspective. And in a lot of research and development organizations, your responsibility is to be the primary voice of the customer inside the building. You might have teams like support or sales that are talking to customers at different points in the product lifecycle, but really your job is to represent the customer when you're doing research and development. So this is one thing that we've definitely seen to be common across industries, across companies, and even sizes of company. Another thing that we've seen be a very strong commonality here is what we call the CEO versus the janitor. And some of you may have heard the phrase, the product manager is the CEO of the product. That part is definitely true. What you may not have heard is the product manager is also the janitor of the product. And what we mean by that is you're both responsible for things like high-level strategic vision and strategy setting for a product or for a set of features, but you're also responsible for all the little things that fall through the cracks, whether it's figuring out the latest set of bugs and doing a prioritization process for them, whether it's helping write text or copy, whether it's figuring out what color some things might be. Your responsibility is to make sure this thing works. So it's pretty unique from a role perspective where you're both doing high-level work and low-level work at the same time. You really have a high dynamic range, which is pretty unique for a lot of roles in industry. The third thing that we've seen sort of is a reframing of the CEO to janitor piece that I found helpful, and it's all about big picture debugs. And one of the things that was really interesting for me when I started my product management career was in the morning I might have a presentation to the executive team of the company, and in the afternoon I'm going through 500 bug reports that have been submitted by customers. And I mentioned this on the last slide, but one of the things that I think has been really powerful about the role and a really good training ground for eventually becoming an executive is you're forced to figure out how to grapple with things both at a high level and at a low level simultaneously at the same time. And there's not a lot of roles where this is true. Most roles are sort of operating at one level of altitude pretty consistently. One of the unique things we've seen about product management, and one of the reasons why we're obviously such big fans, especially early and mid-career, is you get exposure to a lot of things that you would not normally get exposure to otherwise. And it spans the full range all the way from company strategy to literally what should the sentence be. One of the other things we see as a very common pattern in product management is this concept of intra-team and inter-team communication. And this one is very much a function of company size. But as companies get larger, or as organizations get larger, one of the persistent challenges they have is clear communication between different parts of the organization, so that everybody is moving in the same direction. And I took a quick look at some of the companies list for people who are attending. Some of you work at companies that are tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, or even potentially millions of people. And one of the very persistent challenges in organizations of that size is how so the left hand knows what the right hand is doing, and how you make sure that the teams are coordinated and communicating. So a really key component of the product management job, especially as organizations get larger, is to be responsible for communication. And communication for us really breaks down into two different buckets. One bucket about communication within your team, so both defending your team from changes that can happen outside of it, but also making sure that your team has the context that it needs to do good work. And then there's the inter-team communication. So how do you prevent two different teams from accidentally working on the same thing? Or if another team has a dependency on your team, how can you keep them updated on what you're doing? As companies get large, the product management job ends up being very heavily this. For friends who work at larger organizations, they might spend in excess of 75% of their time in product management doing this inter and intra-team communication. So this is very much a core role of the product management function, and I would think of this as scaling usually as organizations or companies get larger. The next thing we wanted to talk about is influence without authority. And this is another place where some of you may be familiar. The product manager, it might be the CEO of the product, but usually in a reporting structure or in a sort of, chain of command hierarchy, nobody in the engineering org reports to you. And this sets up a pretty interesting dynamic. It sets up a dynamic where part of your responsibility is to be a leader from a communication and from a strategy perspective, but you may not have day-to-day line decision-making power over the work that somebody actually does. And the structure is set up this way on purpose. It is a feature, not a bug. The reason it's set up this way on purpose is it forces you to go to meet this higher bar of convincing people that your strategy or your features or your documents are really correct. And whereas in a reporting structure, somebody might just have to listen to what you say, in this scenario, it means you really have a high bar for making sure that you have defended your arguments and you well reasoned through the set of things that you're proposing. So influence without authority is definitely a set of skills that you will pick up. There's sort of a whole toolbox that we see product managers build for becoming really good at this over a series of years. And if people are interested, we can talk more about this in the Q&A section. Two more topics that we really see as common for the product management role across all the organizations that we've ever seen. One of them is knowing your user. And this is really the classic function of product management inside an organization. The origins of product management were actually specifically to bring users into the research and development process. And we've sort of inherited that through a long and distinguished lineage of different organizations. But one of the absolutely core primary jobs of a product manager at every single organization is to spend a lot of time talking to users, a lot of time talking to customers, and to deeply understand the set of things that they need. And if you can't do that, all the other things are going to fall apart because you will not build something that people want or something that people need or something that meets the requirements that have been set out. we spend a lot of time talking to customers to really try and make sure that we have very accurate mental models of the set of things that they care about. The last thing that we really see as a commonality across a lot of the product management roles is what we call bringing the donuts. And this comes from a Ken Norton blog post, who was a product manager at Google for a number of years. And the concept this really embodies is you are both a leader of your team, but you need to be a motivator of your team as well. And it's not really sufficient to sort of lead from the back. You need to lead from the front. You need to lead by example. And we say bringing the donuts because it's representative of sort of keeping team morale or keeping team spirits high, even when things are difficult or even when things are tough. Even though you are not necessarily in charge from a reporting structure perspective, a lot of the time you are the anchor of the team or the spiritual leader of the team. And your job is to make sure that everyone is happy, healthy, and productive and knows what they're working on and why they're working on it. And if you're not able to be an effective motivator and leader of people, it'll be very difficult for you to be successful in the role. So those are the topics that we really see as the common principles that exist across product management. We differentiate between principles and responsibilities. The responsibilities are really what your job is versus a set of things you need to think about. And on a responsibilities perspective, we begin seeing 4 really common patterns that exist across product management, agnostic of industry, agnostic of company size, agnostic of all the other dimensions. And the first one that we spend a lot of time talking about, especially with more senior product managers, is this notion of setting a vision. And this is something that you do progressively more of as you get more senior in your career. But a big part of the product organization's purpose is to have a vision and a strategy for where the company is going from a product perspective. What do we mean when we say vision and strategy? What we mean when we say vision and strategy is there's a set of objectives that the company might want to achieve or that the organization wants to achieve. And a part of your job is to figure out how to get from where you are today to where you want to be. And really good product managers do this by setting goals instead of by setting paths. And what I mean by that is instead of telling people, do this thing and do this thing and then do this thing, you'll say, today we are here and we want to be here. And you can harness the collective intelligence of the organization to get from point A to point B. It's a lot about pushing decision-making to the people who have context. But if you can't set a clear goal for your organization and then let people apply their intelligence to figure out how to achieve that goal, you will have an organization that is running in a number of different directions concurrently, and it's very difficult for them to accomplish anything. So this is really instrumental. Again, is it anything you do more of as you progress through your product management career? But setting a clear vision and a clear set of goals for an organization is an absolute must for any product manager. The second thing that we really see as a common characteristic or common responsibility across organizations and companies is managing a portfolio. And almost no product managers work on only one thing. For those of you who have either worked with product managers or have some experience in the field, you're probably nodding your heads yes when we bring this up. Product managers seem to have their fingers on a lot of different projects concurrently, and your job is to manage a portfolio of things. And the reason your job is to manage a portfolio of things is it's very difficult to accomplish a complex set of goals by doing only one thing. So product managers need a very broad set of skills. You manage literal portfolios of projects from an R&D perspective, but you might be doing a little bit of business development or a little bit of marketing or a little bit of sales or a little bit of PR. You need to know enough in a bunch of different fields to be a bit dangerous. And this portfolio management piece is sort of follows from the last concept of trying to achieve a goal. You have to have a robust set of skills to let you do many things concurrently, and then you must make sure that all of the individual projects ladder up to more than some of the parts. And that's really what portfolio management about. This ties into road mapping, which is another concept that some people in the audience may be familiar with, and we can spend some time on later if people are curious. But a roadmap is basically your plan for managing a portfolio of things, and it's very much one of the core tools of a product manager. The third responsibility that, again, is very universal across all organizations is you have to actually get stuff done. And you can have the best laid plans in the world, you can have the best roadmap in the world, you can be an excellent communicator, but if you and your team are unable to actually get things done, none of that really matters. And a big part of your job is to bring things into existence that were not previously in existence. It is a challenging execution problem. Project management is a subset of product management. Product managers tend to do some project management, but also a bunch of other things, but is a very much a core skill for getting things done. And again, the core thesis here is if you're not able to actually build stuff and turn something into reality, the best laid plans don't matter at all unless you can deliver it to the world and to your customers. The last part of the product manager responsibility set is actually where we spend a lot of our time, and it's called the product lifecycle. And the product lifecycle is an industry agnostic method of taking an individual idea from start to finish. And this is very much what we view as the heart of the product management discipline. You might have heard or seen product managers who work on features, who work on products, whether they're new, whether existing. A core responsibility and skill is to take a single idea and a single problem and take it all the way from idea to exist in the world. And we have a framework that Jiaona and I have developed over a number of years that we think express this fairly well in an industry agnostic sense. The framework involves things like trying to figure out what problem you're solving, why it's actually important. It involves figuring out how to design elegant solutions to those problems. It involves an execution piece around actually building things to get stuff done. It involves a shipping piece that has go-to-market components and PR components, and sort of recognizes that building is not enough. People will not come. You need to figure out how to get your product into the hands of customers. It involves a measurement component so that you can really close the loop on your hypotheses and figure out, did you accomplish what you wanted to accomplish? Then the whole thing is iterated. This is sort of a variant of the scientific method for those of you who are familiar with that as well. But this is very much where we spend a lot of our time coaching and training new product managers. I think Pax may mention this at the end, but we teach an entire online class on just the product lifecycle concept. For those of you who are interested, some opportunities to learn more in the comments. But this is very much a core skill for product managers and especially new product managers in their career. And it's something we spend a lot of time teaching new people. So let's transition topics for a minute. We spent the last 15, 20 minutes talking about what product management is, how is it consistent across companies, how is it consistent across organizations, what do we really view as the core responsibilities and the core set of principles. Let's transition a little bit to talking about PM careers. And I know there was a lot of interest in this from some of the comments and from some of the polls that we saw, but it sounds like many people in the audience are either interested in if you're already a PM, how you advance in your career. If you're not a PM, how do you break into the field? Or if you work with a lot of PMs or think it's an important set of skills, how do you have a better notion of what is actually required to be good at this for your day-to-day job? And on the becoming a PM side, one of the really tricky problems that some of you may have confronted is by far the most likely way to get a product management job is to already have another product management job. This sort of generates an obvious next question. If it's a chicken and an egg problem, how can you go about breaking into the field if that's something that you're excited about? And I think there's really three common paths that I've seen from working with hundreds of product managers in my career. These are not the only paths, but I would say the paths make up probably somewhere between 75 and 80% of product managers that I've worked with. So I want to share some of those paths with you. And then again, if people are interested, we can spend some more time in Q&A talking about different options. So the first path looks like a structured training program. And there are a number of organizations, Google being one of the more prominent ones, that have some concept of an APM or Associate Product Manager program. These programs are often rotational. They're often something like a 2-year program. A number of companies in Silicon Valley, like Google, Dropbox, Facebook, LinkedIn, as a bunch of others, have some analogous set of programs. And they recruit people either out of undergrad, out of graduate school, out of business school, or out of a number of different places. And they basically put them through a multi-year structured program to teach them how to be a product manager. And this has some really nice pros and cons. One of the huge pros of something like this is an organization will invest a lot of time and a lot of resources in training you how to be good at this job. The con of this is the variance on this is pretty low. There isn't really a world where you come out of this 2 years in and you're running a very large organization or some very complex product. This is a path that we very much recommend for people who feel like they learn best from instruction, where you'll get a lot of teaching, a lot of hands-on training, and a lot of like good skill development with pretty strong safety net. If you're willing to roll the dice a bit and are willing to dial up some variance, there's some other interesting paths that I'd say are less structured, but can often or sometimes result in higher ranges of outcomes. So the second path that we see is to start something. And I use founder in the broadest sense of the word here. It doesn't necessarily need to mean founder in the Silicon Valley classic sense of I started a business, I raised a bunch of venture capital. It can mean almost anybody who started or run a small business or a growing business. So whether it's a general manager, whether it's a small business owner, whether it's a literal venture-backed startup founder, one of the things that's common across all of those types of people is you've had to do a little bit of everything to know enough about sales, about marketing, about organizational structures, about people management, about building something people want, that some of those skills translate very well into product management. And this is a bit of a circuitous path. So if your goal is to become a product manager, I don't know that I would recommend that you go start a company in order to become a product manager. But in a lot of the acquisitions that I've seen or a lot of the hiring that I've seen, I would guess that somewhere between like 15 and 25% of the product managers that I've worked with ultimately came into product management after starting their own business in some way. So it may not have been their path from the beginning, but there's a lot of overlap between product management and founder. And it's a place that a non-trivial number of people end up breaking into the field this way. The last opportunity is pretty broad, and it's just a category I'll call getting lucky. And getting lucky really means that somebody gives you a break and they make a bet on you. And it's kind of hard to have a strategy that we suggest around this. Really, this is about a person willing to go out of their way to say, I've worked with you, I'm willing to put some of my credibility on the line and really back you here. But I'll mention two things that I've seen be the highest probability paths in order for people getting lucky. If you go back to some of the product management responsibilities that we talked about a few minutes ago, I think there are really two key areas where you can develop product management skills in jobs that don't look like product management. One of them is talking to customers, and the other one is this notion of general management. On the talking to customer side of things, two organizations that I probably see most often end up breaking into product management are some notion of customer support or customer success, and some people in sales. And the reason that both of those things are true is both of those organizations just spend a lot of time talking to customers. And if you talk to enough customers, you'll have a really good sense of what your customers care about and really accurate mental models of your customers. And that is such a core part of the product manager job that if you're able to bring a strong enough representation of your customers, an organization is sometimes willing to teach you the rest of the pieces around prioritization, roadmaps, project management, et cetera. So I'd say one place where I've seen more people get lucky at breaking into the field is by spending time in some role where they talk a lot to customers. The other one is kind of similar to the founder path that we talked about, and it's someone who has general management experience in some way. So this can sometimes come in the form of business development. It can sometimes come in the form of a literal general manager of a function. But it means that you've spent time building a lot of the skills like managing a portfolio of projects, managing people, managing complex requirements. You probably have a pretty good financial understanding and a pretty good business understanding. So that's another place where you sort of bring a different set of skills, and the bet they're making is, well, we can teach you to talk to customers. So again, these are not the only paths. I would say these are probably the most common paths that I see. And if people are interested, we can spend a little bit more time on them towards the end of the session. So what do people look for? We talked about some of the paths, but really, what do people look for? And what do we look for when we're hiring people who don't have product management background? A lot of these are probably unsurprising. A big part of the product management role is figuring out how to be intellectually honest about what you know and what you don't know. So some combination of curiosity and intelligence is particularly important. Curiosity because it's usually not a great strategy to think that you sort of know what people want. You need to spend a lot of time talking to people. And if you're not genuinely curious, it's hard to fake that. Analytical ability, and I'd say just precision of thinking ends up being very important as well. You'll be formulating a lot of complex arguments, sort of complex theses. And if you're not precise and clear in your communication and your thinking style, it'll be difficult to do that well. We talked about domain expertise a bit. whether it's domain expertise on a customer, whether it's domain expertise on management, really making sure that you bring sort of an anchor set of skills in one of the things we talked about is important. And the last is hard to put a finger on, but it's a bit about potential. It's really someone in an organization going out of their way and saying, we are excited and willing to make a bet on you. So I want to transition a bit to talk about some common PM interview questions. I know this is one of the things we mentioned in the summary and got a lot of positive feedback about. Most product manager interview questions come from a relatively small set of topics. And there definitely are exceptions to this, but if you're looking for a product manager role, I'll say at any sort of technology company, you're very likely to get some set of these questions. And the exact questions themselves may differ a bit. Exactly what the interviewer is looking for might differ a bit. But I very much think of these as a pretty common foundational set of topics. And then there's lots of resources that you can dig into if you want more information on the topics. The first one, which may be the most obvious, is some notion of product intuition. And what we mean about product intuition is the interviewer will try and figure out, do we feel like you have a good way of understanding how products actually work and how they could be better? So very common sets of questions that we see here are things like, tell me about your favorite product. Okay, now let's assume that you're in charge of it. How would you make it better? And what would you do? That's probably that or some variant of it is the most common one that I see. We see other things like you're given a set of requirements and you have to design a product. So it might be something like, how do we design a kitchen for someone who only has the use of one hand? Or how do we make sure that as we take product A and sort of move into another country, what are some of the things or considerations you might have? So product intuition, there's a pretty wide range of questions that we've seen, but I would very much view this as thinking about an existing product and saying, how could I modify it or how could I change it for X? Or how could I create a new set of products to meet a specific set of requirements? So product intuition is probably the most common one. I think I've seen this in basically every interview. This one varies a bit on the company, but another core responsibility of product managers is to have some notion of design. And product management and design are different disciplines for sure, and there are different set of skills required to be excellent at both. But at the same time, there's a fair amount of overlap between them. And one of the reasons there's overlap is a key tenet of good design is deeply understanding the customer, and that is one of the skills or the knowledge the product manager can often bring to the table. So we've seen some design questions. I would say this one probably exists in more than half of the interview loops that I've seen. And it's not design in the sense of, do you know how to use Photoshop or do you know how to use Sketch or Figma? It's design in the sense of, well, I'm going to give you something existing, like an existing product or an existing feature we have. And I'm going to give you a set of constraints and a set of challenges. I want to see you actually draw what we would build. And the drawing is not the important part. We're not, like, the purpose of this is not, are you an excellent sketcher? The purpose of this is, are you able to construct something at wireframe level fidelity that deeply thinks through all of the decisions you actually have to make to construct something that somebody would actually use? So design, very common. We see this on a bunch. Technical ability is interesting. This one is fairly hit or miss in that some companies are very into this and they want to make sure like all of their product managers actually have computer science degrees, for example. Some companies are very much on the other end of the spectrum and do very little technical screening for product management at all. So I think this one has a pretty high range in what I've seen. But I'll give you my take on it. My take on it is that product managers spend a lot of time working with engineers, whether it's hardware, whether it's software, whatever it happens to be. You're going to spend a lot of time with people whose job is to turn sort of a spec sheet into reality. And if you're not able to be credible in front of those people, you're going to have a very difficult time commanding respect and being a real leader of that team. So my take on this is it's not about the degree. It's not about having a checkbox on your resume that says, I took this certificate, I did this class. Really what it's about is if we put you in a room with a bunch of highly technical people, are you able to come out of that with a credible discussion where they walk away saying, I respect that person's ability? There's a lot of different ways to accomplish that. It can be side projects. It could be it could be many decades of tinkering. It could be self-taught. It could be school-taught. Pretty agnostic on how it's accomplished. But my personal take on this is It's not about having the degree per se. It's about making sure that when we put you in a room with talented people who are responsible for converting paper ideas into reality, that you can come out of that discussion credibly every time. The second to last one, I see very commonly some notion of analytical ability. You might have heard of consulting style questions around estimation or Fermi estimation or some other things. A lot of what this question is trying to get at is your ability to think precisely and your ability to do estimation. And the reason estimation matters and sort of back of the envelope math matters is it's a really powerful tool for making decisions to try and figure out if you're on the right path. This is a combination of quantitative thinking and precision of thinking. Analytical questions can be things like cases. They can be things like formulating written arguments. It can be writing a one-page document, outlining a strategy. This one has a lot of variation in the forms that we see, but it's very much a core skill around your ability to think quantitatively, not just qualitatively, and your ability to construct a coherent set of arguments that another person can understand. The last topic that we see a lot is prioritization. And prioritization is a whole topic that we could spend many, many hours on. A really core part of the product manager job is prioritization. And it's to say, of all of the set of things we could do, what are the things that we're actually going to pick, and why is that the right set of things? So there's a ton of different prioritization frameworks out there that anybody can go look up after this. For me, it's a lot less about picking the correct prioritization framework. I don't really think there is a correct prioritization framework, but it's about making sure that you have a strong toolkit of how to do prioritization. You know things like how to do estimations of impact, estimations of cost, the basic math around things like return on investment, and then making sure that you're applying that in a consistent and coherent way to produce something. Prioritization is, again, very much a skill that we see commonly come up on the product management perspective. So that was sort of the structured stuff that we wanted to cover today. I wanted to make sure that we leave a little bit of time for Q&A. So I'm going to turn it back over to Pax to take the lead on the next topics here.
Great. Thank you, Anand. That was wonderful. Okay. With that, I want to move into the Q&A with Anand. So Anand, we got several types of questions that might be unsurprising. So I thought we might work through them kind of in blocks. So the biggest block is kind of similar to a lot of things that you already went over, which is what makes a good PM. If I'm going to transition into it from a technical background, a business analytics background, what makes a good PM? So I thought maybe it might be useful if you talk a little bit more, just go into a little bit more detail. Again, if you're choosing one or two sort of potential career paths into PM, to talk a little bit more about. So if you have a technical background, what are the things you might want to be thinking about right now if you want to make that move into PM? And then maybe we can choose one other as well. Say you're moving from sales into PM. What might be some of the things you want to think about and learn about in order to make that transition?
Sure. I very much view the core, like product management distilled down to two sentences, is what problem are you solving and why is it important? And that is the heart of product management, in my opinion. It's the part that the product manager most exclusively owns. So you may work with the designer on how should we solve that problem. You may work with an engineer on how should we build that problem. But really the part of the product lifecycle where you are the core owner, and that is often a semi-solitary activity, is what problem are we solving and why is it important? So let's take the engineer example that you mentioned. One of the common ways that I see those transitions be rocky is when you transition from an engineering background, you immediately jump to how should we solve this problem? And that is not the core problem that a product manager needs to solve. The core question that the product manager needs to answer is, what problem are we solving? Why is it important? Same on the sales side of things. The thing your brain might naturally jump to is, well, how do we sell this? So a big part of the transition from function A to product management is making sure that you take the set of skills that you have developed in your prior role, you put them, you sort of compartmentalize them a bit and say, everything doesn't look like a nail when I'm holding a hammer, and you make sure that you're not sort of applying the wrong skills when necessary. And then when you get to that part of the product lifecycle where it's how should we actually solve it or how do we actually sell it, that's when you pull out your toolkit and you say, great, I know what to do with this. But I would say that the number one way that I see those transitions go poorly is overly relying on the prior set of skills that you had that made you good at your past job, which are not the same as the skills that make you good at the next job. So it's having this almost this map of the skills that's pretty similar to what we shared earlier on, and recognizing when you're in a place where you sort of know how to do that, and recognizing when you're in a place you don't know how to do that, and being intellectually honest about it.
That's fantastic. Then kind of forward is, once you are a PM, what is that career path? I mean, maybe you're just building on your own. What does that career path look like? How do you evolve and grow in that role?
Yeah, there's a lot of different ways to do this. I would say there's probably two axes that are interesting to think about from product management career perspective. One of them is the notion of moving up from a people management perspective. So if you're an individual contributor, product manager, then maybe you're a manager of product managers, then a manager of managers, then maybe a head of a function, then maybe an executive. So there's a career path there that looks like progressing through the people management side of things. There's another career track that looks like progressing through the complexity side of things. So there are very, very senior product managers, for example, who don't manage people, but manage extraordinarily large, extraordinarily complicated sets of projects. So the two axes I would really think about are complexity of project, or just scope of project and ambiguity of project, and then people management. And my suggestion to people is that they not be too focused on the people management side of things. It can be a thing that you want if it's a thing you're interested in, but some of the brutal math here is say there's one product manager for something like every 7 engineers, and there's one product manager for every 7 product managers, and there's a manager of managers for every 49 product managers. The math starts to get pretty complicated. You don't really get these levels of product managers until you have multi-hundred or multi-thousand person organizations. So I very much encourage people to think not only about the people management side of things, but also about the skills side of things, and to figure out how you're working through progressively larger, and not just larger, but more ambiguous problems.
So as a more senior product manager, how do you help guide junior product managers through this path? What are some of the things what are some of the problems you set them? How do you sort of structure this?
Totally. There's a whole, if you happen to join my team, we will sit down for an hour in the first week that you start, and we're going to walk through a whole way about how I think about this. So the way that I think about this is the product management job really breaks down into 2 different domains. One of them is what we call the problem space, and one of them is what we call the solution space. And for people who are curious about this, we spend a lot of time in the online class talking about this. The problem space is really what problem are we solving and why is it important. The solution space is how should we solve this problem. And for new product managers, the problem space is much harder than the solution space, as sort of a general statement. And for new product managers, the set of things that I'll give them is usually a project that I already know is important, so it's pre-prioritized, a project where I already know how to do it, like I already know what the answer is, and I just want them to do it. There's really an execution problem. It's a project management and a sort of a team credibility problem. Once you get good at that, you go up one level. And up one level is, great, same thing, no problem space ambiguity. We already know what the problem is. We already know why it's important. Then you get a little bit of solution space ambiguity. So maybe we don't know what the answer is. There might be 3 different ways to solve this, and we sort of want you to pick the best one. So you expand the scope a bit. Up one from that is a lot of solution space ambiguity. So we know we want to solve this. We have literally no idea how to do it. It's sort of complicated. It's thorny. Like, you figure out the best solution. And only after you've worked your way all the way up the solution side of things do you move over to the problem side of things. The problem side of things is now, should we do this in the first place? So the intro to the problem side is, great, here's sort of a basket of things, and you tell me what we should do. And it's about picking the basket and building roadmaps. And once you get really senior on the problem side, it's not even a basket of projects, it's just a goal. The goal is just like, hey, we want to break into this new market, or we want to launch in a new country, or we're not winning in this demographic and we want to be winning in this demographic. Or sometimes a revenue goal. We need a new line of things that makes 25 million in recurring revenue. Like, it's very loose and very broad. And your job is to figure out all of the things associated with the problem side and the solution side.
That's fantastic. That sounds great. That is, and how often in reality, I mean, how easily can you actually structure in that way? I mean, in a fast-moving, fast-paced environment, do you have a lot of success in sort of setting them up in that way?
Pretty well. And the reason it works pretty well is for more senior product managers to be capable of doing anything down that list, So the job of the senior product managers is to support the junior product managers. So you don't get to say, I opt out of the low-level stuff just because I'm senior. No, your job is to make sure that all the low-level stuff gets done. So it's very much a leading from the front mentality. So if you have an imbalance where maybe there's too many solution things and not enough problem things, great. Senior product managers are going to take over, and they're going to pitch in, and they're going to do the stuff they did when they started earlier in their career, because it's what needs to happen. So it's about being outcome oriented for the organization. It's not about saying, I'm too senior to do this type of work.
That's great. So kind of moving from, how to break in to the career path to maybe a few questions that came in about defining the role further. So one of the big ones that came up a few times, and you've already touched on this, but if you can elaborate on the difference between a product manager and a project manager. And they're obviously quite different, but I think there's a lot of confusion.
Totally. So let me start with what I think the role of a project manager is. A project manager's job is to keep the trains running on time. We already know what problem we're solving. We already know why it's important. We already know how we want to solve it. My job is to do all of the messy things around making the execution run on time. And project management is an increasingly important role as you have more complicated projects or projects that require large numbers of disciplines. So if you're working on, a rocket, for example, project management is very much like a core skill, and it's sometimes broken out into literally different roles where that's the only thing that they do. That is a subset of the job of a product manager. The real job of a product manager is, should we do this thing in the first place? Not how do I keep the trains running on time? And once you get to the point where you figured out that we should do it, you will have a project management component to make sure that it actually gets done. I mentioned that. I mentioned in the webinar that you can have the best laid plans in the world if you don't actually get stuff done. It doesn't matter. So a good product manager needs to have project management skills. But so the hard part of the role is, should we even do this in the first place, and how should it work? Not how do I keep the execution management moving.
That's awesome. The other thing that came up a lot, and I think a lot of people really loved your phrase, influence without authority. So can you elaborate on sort of two sides of that? Just in general, can you talk a little bit more about some tips on how to do that? I know you've talked about this in the past. And maybe more specifically, the PM role seems to move across a lot. I mean, part of its function is move across a lot of aspects of the organization. So how do you, while influencing without authority, how do you avoid stepping on the toes of, say, sales or something like that?
Yeah. So let me talk about maybe the second one first. Maybe this is naive, but sort of a hallmark from my perspective of well-run organizations is you shouldn't be worrying too much about toe stepping. And there's almost always enough work to be done and enough challenges to be done. And if people aren't welcoming the help, maybe there's something to unpack there from a company culture perspective. So I don't tend to spend a lot of time worrying about the toe stepping piece. But at the same time, it's being humble and recognizing that if the sales team has talked to 10,000 customers and you've talked to 5, what's the chance that you just walk into the room and have the best idea? Is probably not that high. So that's the second piece. The first piece, the influence without authority, what are some strategies for doing this well? I'll give you a couple. This basically comes down to, how do you form very strong and coherent arguments? And I think there are 2 real sets of skills that product managers need to build here. One of them is a combination of analytical and written, and the other one is oratory. The oratory ones are, if you are not a persuasive speaker, you're going to have a very difficult time influencing without authority. There are a lot of tools and tricks that are independent of product management for becoming good at that. You need to be good at public speaking. You need to be good at creating coherent arguments on the fly. You need to be good at a lot of things that look like speaking to large groups of people. You need to learn sort of the patterns and the narratives for giving presentations. That is a set of skills you can practice that is independent of product management, that looks mostly like some combination of public speaking, especially extemporaneous public speaking. The second one is really constructing strong arguments. And the constructing strong arguments, I think, has a thought piece and a writing piece. A good product manager will probably spend a third of their time reading, a third of their time writing, and a third of their time talking. And we spoke about the talking piece. The reading and the writing is, reading gives you information to formulate really strong arguments, and then you must write them down. You must write them down in a way that is extraordinarily clear and extraordinarily precise. Sort of provides a brief for anybody to walk through the argument and say, I understand why we're doing this. I understand why it's important, and this is an airtight argument. So the skills I would really think of are reading and digesting large amounts of information and then forming conclusions from them that are not super biased. So like you're trying to go where the data takes you. The second is writing it down in a clear and concise way for anybody to consume. And the third is being able to extemporaneously speak to large sets of people about the prior two things. Those are the core set of skills for influencing without authority.
Great. Thank you, Anand. I think we have time for maybe two more quick questions. So the first one is how or have you seen the role of product manager changing both just recently in general, but more specifically in response to COVID-19?
Yeah, I'll talk about the more general one first. 10 years ago, nobody wanted to be a product manager. So like when I broke into the field, it just like wasn't a thing that came up. A lot of people were like, what is that? I've never heard of it. And now we see people coming out of business school or just lots of different areas where there's a lot of interest and excitement. I think it's grown in interest sort of as technology has become an increasingly large portion of the sector, like the US GDP or the world GDP. And the reason that there are more and more product manager roles is one of the challenges of software is if you can build anything you want, picking the right thing is almost the hardest problem. So I've seen just a lot more interest, a lot more excitement about the product management field, both because I think there's more work to be done, and I think it's a way that a lot of people are interested in breaking into the technology sector. On the COVID-19 side of things, this has been a very interesting learning experience for me. One of my very strongly held beliefs is that it is difficult to be a product manager remotely. And the reason that I think that's true is because such a large portion of your job is of influence without authority, there's a lot of benefit to be had from the hallway conversation, the pulling somebody aside, the in-person meeting, all of that stuff. And COVID-19 has very much made a lot of those things go away or become remote. So it's pushed a lot of previously unstructured work into structured work, like more written documents, more structured check-ins, more explicit go, no-go meetings in ways that have previously been a little bit more informal. So I think COVID-19 in a weird way has forced us to think like a bigger company. So Pilot's about a 130, 140 person organization. I'd say previously my job, a big part of my role was how do we make that act like a 75 person organization so we can be a little bit faster and a little bit more nimble, but that had a very heavy emphasis on in-person communication. And now we probably act more like a 200 person organization. We write things down, we have recurring meetings, we have a lot of structure that is forced to exist as a replacement for in-person communication.
That's great. So it sounds like it's a product manager's problem to solve. It's a new
very much. I mean, this is, I'm being a little bit facetious here, but one of my core beliefs is that being good at product management just gives you a toolkit for problem solving. It's not about product management per se. You spend a lot of time sitting and intentionally thinking about building a toolkit for being good at solving problems. You can apply that in personal life, you can apply that to work, you can apply that to whatever, but it's one of very few jobs where your responsibility is to think about how to be good at solving problems in the abstract sense.
That's fantastic. So maybe as a last question then, before we sign off, we've talked about some of the courses that are available for Stanford. You've talked about some of the experience you have. Any other general advice for people who are interested in breaking in and where they should go to learn, how they should learn about product management?
Yeah. I mean, I'm obviously biased as a teacher of a couple of courses. If you're interested in taking those, I would strongly encourage it. In all seriousness, one of the reasons we created the online course, originally we created the in-person class at Stanford, and then we turned it into an online course. The reason we did that is we struggled to find resources that we really liked for our new product managers. I think there's a lot of good information out there on sort of product management interviews, and then it just stops. It's like, great, how do you get the job? And now you have the job, and good luck, figure it out. And people are trying to pull together a roadmap for being good at their job from Medium posts and news articles and ad hoc groups and just like all these other things. And there is no like textbook for product management. So a lot of what we were thinking about when we built the online class is, what's the video analog of the textbook for product management? And what are the set of things that I wish I knew when I started out my career? And a lot of it is what we talked about today. It's really anchoring on the product lifecycle. It's this knowledge of problem space versus solution space. It's a lot of the things that we discussed today. And you can construct it by reading hundreds of different blog posts, but we tried to put it all in one place.
Great. Well, I think that's it, Anand. Thank you so much for your time, and thank you everyone who joined us today. We had really excellent participation. We didn't get to nearly all the questions. Hopefully it was useful to sort of organize them by general category. So there will be more webinars in the future. If you're interested in Anand and Jay-Z's course, please check it out. Again, there's a link right there in your user interface. And about a week from today, you will get a recording of this webinar, so you can rewatch it if you missed any of it or if you want to better absorb the material. So thank you, Anand, and thank you everyone who joined us today.
Thank you, everyone.